Yeah. Ça bien? Ça sent bien. Ah, yeah, yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's it. That's it. Yeah. And I used to do the military. Oh, wow. For just 40 years. Is that what? Okay. All right. So, is there any
Microphone.
Yeah, it's viral.
I think you have to turn it on.
Je vais inviter, bonjour, je vais inviter un jeune scientiste pour venir me rejoindre, une particulièrement. Au Sénégal, c'est la parité absolue aux élections. Nous sommes l'un des rares pays au monde à avoir 30% de députés femmes à l'Assemblée. Madame Gay, qui est à côté de... Venez, venez, you have to empower youth. Come sit next to me. Donc, j'ai un moderator. Comme c'est juste un keynote speech, I'm going to get a young scientist who comes from far away from Netherlands. She'll be on a panel after this one. So I'm going to invite her to sit next to me. So to show how senior people can nurture young people to go up. And very soon we'll be here chairing and moderating. But you have to come back home. Don't stay there. Okay? We're waiting on you. Bon, merci beaucoup. Merci vraiment. Je pense qu'il faudrait encore renouveler ces remerciements au professeur Souleymane Mboup pour de PDG ou PCA de l'ISF et toute son équipe. Remercier aussi nos amis du MESRI et particulièrement le professeur Gallo Diop de la Direction générale de la recherche et de l'innovation et l'Académie nationale des sciences et techniques du Sénégal représentée ici sur le podium par ma personne, mais aussi par d'éminents membres qui sont nos maîtres de faculté. Je vous nommer ici le professeur Galaye Sall, le professeur Oumagaï, mais aussi le professeur Souleymane Mboup et Anta Talja qui sont là. Je pense que l'Académie est bien représentée et bien citée pendant cette activité-là. Nous allons, comme le temps est assez dépassé, nous avons un keynote speaker qui est le professeur Nyema Tagbo. And you're going to read the topic of his talk.
So welcome to everyone and thank you for being here. So the keynote speaker of today will be discussing how to accelerate health innovation through research and development. And the floor is yours, Professor.
And I would like, before you start, to say to some people here that this young lady next to me is a daughter to one of our students, former students, professeur Galaye Sall. J'ai le privilège d'être à côté de la fille du professeur Ndeye Ramatoulaye Diagne Guèye, pédiatre et président de la commission médicale d'établissement de l'hôpital de Diamniadio, qui est l'élève des élèves du professeur Galaye Sall. Donc Galaye a de quoi être fier d'avoir formé de super médecins qui ont des enfants qui peuvent faire ceci aujourd'hui. Bonne chance et toutes nos prières vous accompagnent. Sir, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much. Tout le monde m'entend bien? Okay. So it's such a pleasure for me to be here back in Senegal, especially back to ESF, and especially to be invited for this special occasion. So I've been given the task to discuss this important topic, accelerating health innovation through research and development. For traduction? Okay, so you want me, can you turn it on? Just put it on. Is that on? Sure. Okay, we're dealing with logistics. C'est bon? On peut commencer? OK. Il y aura une traduction en français parce que le séminaire sera donné en anglais. Et c'est sur la chaîne 1. So anybody who need the translation in French can have those. Good to go? I'm so excited. I have to talk fast. Okay, to make up for the time. So my name is Tagbo Niepa, and I am an associate professor of chemical engineering and biomedical engineering at Carnegie Mellon University. So basically, this huge topic that we have to discuss now is going to be just my perspective, my vision, mostly the vision of an academics. How do we usually accelerate research when it comes to healthcare, health innovation? So There's this popular says that science knows no country. Do you guys remember who said that? Science knows no country. Because knowledge belongs to humanity. It is a torch that illuminates the world. Any idea who said that? Come on, scientists. It's Louis Pasteur. And so he was a great scientist. As far as we know, he was what we call the father of bacteriology or virology. And Pasteur did significant discovery when it comes to microbiology. He's considered the father of different techniques, innovations, such as pasteurization, such as vaccination, and even fermentation. So that's mean that for whoever drinks a beer, whenever you drink a beer, please thank Pasteur for making that happen. For whoever drink a juice as well, thank him for doing the same thing because he invented that notion of sterilization to that process. But I have something in common with him, and it's based on my modest start. So after I graduated my associate degree in food science, I did work at the Pasteur Institute in Côte d'Ivoire. This is exactly where I'm from. So for those who do not know where Côte d'Ivoire is, I'm not talking about the Senegalese, of course, because I heard the president today. But for those who don't know where Côte d'Ivoire is, it's still in West Africa. It's one of the closest countries to Senegal. But I was much more impacted by this lady that you guys see here on the picture. Her name is Professor Dosomire. She's actually the director of the Pasteur Institute. And so I did graduate with food degrees, with food science degree. And I went to the Pasteur Institute to be there as a food microbiologist. So my first assignment, you can imagine, as a food microbiologist, is just to go to different stores, collect the food product, bring that to the lab, and test if they meet the specification before going to the market. And that was my first exposure to microbiology. But then there was a bunch of technicians doing food microbiology. While on the other side of the same institute, there was actually a lot of needs as to come to medical microbiology. So she decided to switch me over to a medical microbiology side. And the process in terms of analysis is exactly the same. What she decided to do was like, well, now instead of yogurt, instead of juice, what you'll be analyzing blood, urine sample, and whatever bodily fluid to determine what makes people sick. So I had that close interaction with people. And at some point, she was like thinking about something, and she's a very visionary person. So she was thinking about something that was very much of a big issue in the Ivory Coast. So the Pasteur Institute is in Abidjan. And if you can imagine that, most of the people that need to do their tests to determine if they're sick basically has to drive sometime 10 hours to be there in order to do these tests. So what she decided to do was like, well, since you have a food science degree, maybe let's plan to make some type of unit of fabrication of reagent and media. And then we can make those media and distribute that all over the place in Ivory Coast so that people don't need to travel that far, but we simply send the medium to them and then they get tested. And we start working on this unit. We start building the unit to a point where the unit became a reality. And then she decided that, well, now it's becoming too big for you. I'm going to hire a pharmacist. And that's how I realized that maybe my food science degree wasn't enough. So I have to go back to school. So this is exactly where I graduated from, that College of Food Engineering in the Ivory Coast. Then I decided to move to Germany. And I went to the Technical University of Dortmund. And then for some family reason, I relocated in the US in 2007 and went to Syracuse University, where I did complete my bachelor and my PhD. So this is a picture of me here when I was younger. A big fan of Syracuse. If you know Syracuse, we're bleeding orange, like orange juice. That's us, because we're very proud about the culture in Syracuse. And then in 2014, I graduated my PhD. But during that time, I had a support system, and that support system was my wife and my two beautiful daughters. I mean, I like them on this picture because they're cute and they listen then. But now they're 13 and 15, so other type of ladies that I have to deal with. Anyway, But the main thing that was very much important was how agriculture already was pressing the fact that we have to learn about innovation. So at Syracuse, for instance, they put a class together where they took students from different departments and they put them in the same classroom. And they told them that, well, you have to think about that big idea that could lead to a startup company. So from my microbiology background, I realized that, well, maybe we can use UVC light to kill germs. That's how we use to sterilize the biosafety cabinet, for instance. So we decided to identify a problem and to come up with a solution. And our main problem was actually with door handle. I'm not sure if you guys have the same issue, but when you come back from the bathroom, I'm not sure what's the process that you use to get out. Some people will simply use a napkin, paper towel to hold the door open so that they don't have to touch the door handle after washing their hand. Some would use their elbow, and basically you can use your own method. But what we decided to come up with, those 3 students decided to come up with some type of automated sterilization system. And that sterilization system was just something that was coming up on the door handle and then maybe shining some UVC light to sterilize the door handle. And basically before somebody come and touch it, it was already sterilized. So from that idea, we applied actually to the New York State Business Plan competition, and we won $70,000. So with that money, we submitted the patent application. And then with the rest of the money, basically we used that to incorporate, to build the company. Initially, that company was called Helios Innovative Technology because Helios is the sun. Then we turned that into Purple Sun. And basically, because of the impact that we started having based on that funding, basically we started thinking about auto design, we were on the news. And because we got on the news, basically we got invited to the White House to come to talk about this business venture. And that's us here, very young. But then with time, what we decided to do was really to move on to develop a technology that can really be impactful. With door handle, basically people have multiple ways to get away with a door handle, right? You don't have to touch it. So with this, we decided to come up with such unit here that we call a multivector UV system. If you think about that, it's almost as if you have a space shuttle that can simply encapsulate a whole hospital bed and basically shine light on that. So you can fold that in different manners, sometimes to face the wall, and then basically shine light on the wall. So when we designed that particular product, it was actually for hospital to use maybe 2 or 3 in the hospital room. Just in 2 minutes, you can sterilize an hospital bed and make sure that there is no dangerous pathogen. So that idea went further. And as you can imagine, the company launched to a point where at some point we had some investors, especially with Northwell Venture, that really invested into our company, where basically we raised funds to the point of 10 million. Does that mean that at some point the company was worth a lot of money? But that's not necessarily the most important aspect of it. The most important aspect of it is that that training that we receive at school was really to be able to identify some issues and find some innovative solution to those issues. And one issue can lead to a new one solution can lead to a new problem. And basically that's how innovation goes. So today that company has been sold and acquired by Leviant that continue to sell this product and move forward with that. But my main goal wasn't necessarily to become a CEO of a company or a CTO of a company, because that's what I was during that time. My main goal was really to become an academics, because I thought that doing that under the umbrella of a university gave me much more leverage when it comes to helping others really to go to the same path as I did when I was a PhD student. So I went to UPenn, that's in Pennsylvania, in Philly, where I did my postdoc. And basically, these were my 2 champions here, Dr. Kate Stebby and Diane Lee. So I was co-advised by those 2 people. And what they did was to make sure that they pushed me toward academia. This was at the conference, and that's actually the department chair. We took that picture. And as you can see here, I was extremely mad because my postdoc advisor was trying to just reshuffle my presentation just like 2 minutes before I go and give this. So I didn't like that. But she did all she could really to allow me to today become a faculty member. My goal was really to become a faculty member in what we call a research-intensive university, so a R1 university. If you think about that in the US, it's mostly a university that focuses on research. Research is the main core mission of that university. So basically, It could be a private, a public university, but sometimes there's a lot of branding name linked to this university. That university is the University of Pittsburgh. So after my postdoc in 2017, that's where I landed as a faculty member. And this is how that university looked like, with that huge tower that you see in the middle. And actually, this is actually a representation of that university. And this is the landmark of the University of Pittsburgh, but this is exactly where my building was. I was exactly on the 9th floor of that building, and this is where my lab was also put together. So if you think about that, that's a lab that is funded based on a startup. So the university funding is about 1.3 million that was given really to build that entity where most of the students from my lab did evolve and graduated from. So a very nice environment. But the idea was really to do something that would be allowing me somehow to train students and allow them as well to go through that path. So this year, exactly in August, I got recruited by another university. So that's sometimes a competition that happened when it comes to university in the US. That university is called Carnegie Mellon University. And if you think about that, here is the tower that I was showing in Pittsburgh. So that means that I walked just across the street to go to the other university. But then that other spot here was where my lab used to be. So that means from a quad of that university, you can really see my former lab. But the goal was really the same, really advance innovation, advance research and education when it comes to biointerface, especially microbiointerface. That's how I refer to my research field. So the impact about from whatever the training at the Pasteur Institute was that I learned very quickly the problem of multi-drug resistance. So I remember one of the last cases that we're dealing with as we're doing the urine testing of a lady is that when it came, it was completely turbid. And then she started using some medication, so the urine turned completely to dark yellow to almost blue because of the antibiotic that she was taking. But then still, we can realize that the pathogen E. coli, a very drug-resistant strain of E. coli, was still present. So drug resistance is really a big problem that we have to face. In 2019, actually, the CDC put together this report. And when you open the report, the first page, that's the dedication that you see. It was actually dedicated to almost 50,000 families in the US who lost a loved one because of antibiotic resistance. So it's a big issue. But the dedication did not stop there. It goes on third line, and the countless healthcare provider, public health expert, innovators, and others who are fighting back with everything they have. So that means that in addition to those people who got sick and their family, that dedication was also going toward you and I, people interested in the healthcare environment. So it stuck with me just because that number represented 50,000 for the US, but worldwide, it was about 1.2 million of people who died that year. And the expectation is actually 10 million of people who die from drug-resistant infection in 2050. So does this signify that this is a very important problem that you and I will need to fix or maybe to think about? Or do we need to wait for another pandemic before we start paying attention to those type of issues? No, it's much more urgent than that. In the previous slide, actually on the right-hand side here, what we're showing is that more and more bugs or pathogens are becoming more and more drug resistant. So that means that they become superbugs. Somehow the antibiotic that is currently available does not function anymore on those bugs. And the way that those microbes usually resist to the antibiotic is that they're very smart. Sometimes they can change their cellular target. Sometimes they can change their genetic makeup. Sometimes, basically, they create a wall around themselves so that the drug does not permeate. And even when the drug permeates, they can also produce some type of some type of metabolite that can inhibit the drug. So the reason that I pay attention to this report was actually because I was invited to London to participate into this TV show. And the title of that show was just, what is to come after the antibiotic is over, right? when there's no longer antibiotic, how are we going to be able to fight multi-drug resistance? So the perspective that I was bringing was basically a perspective of an engineer that maybe doesn't necessarily think that antibiotics is the only way to go, but we can definitely design alternative technologies. So I revised my mission on my lab. Actually, it's now to train those innovators who are fighting back with everything they have. So that means that I'll talk about innovation in terms of academic R&D. Right? How do we move? How do we train? How do we make sure that others will have that possibility to basically eradicate these type of infections? So my lab currently focuses on multiple areas. As you can see here for this research vision, my microbes are in the center of whatever I do in my lab. And the way that I think about microbes, not all of them are bad. Most of them are good. So basically when they're good, we're trying to promote their growth. We're trying to take care of them. And whenever they're bad, that's when we're trying to find a way to eradicate them. So basically I have all these research questions that I'm going to start explaining one by one. So one of the first points that my lab focuses on is actually the drug resistance pathogen. We're trying to find an innovative way to control them. And some of the technology that I developed in my lab focuses on some type of electrochemical therapy. Another one is just using some type of nanomaterial. The main idea behind that is that the drug has to diffuse into the cells in order to kill the cells. But if we have some type of way to get away with that cell membrane barrier, by depolarizing the activity of the cells, for instance, it's more likely that we might be able to introduce other biocides in the cells and kill them. So any type of physical chemical factor can help in that process. So here in the center of this image, you see a dot, and that dot is actually called Candida albicans. So Candida albicans is a yeast. If you provide nutrients to that yeast, from 1, you move to 2, from 2, become 4, from 4, you become 8. And basically, in just about 48 hours, you have billions of cells. Basically, this is, if you get that load of cells per gram of tissue, you're already dealing with an infection. So the issue with Candida albicans is that Candida albicans is in eukaryotic cells. So that means that a cell that has almost the same constitution as our own human cells. As you increase the amount of drug that is needed really to get rid of them, it's more likely that you're making an environment that is also toxic to yourself. So basically, the threshold becomes extremely narrow. So what we decided to do was actually using this electrochemical therapy because we can deliver a very low dose of current that is below the perception level of humans. But actually, what that current does, you can see Candida albicans here. In blue, you have a cell membrane is stained with FON1. And basically, the conversion that you see for those red dots mean that it is metabolically active. But after going through that process, we have permeabilization of this bug so that the antibiotic that is labeled here in red can now diffuse and reach cellular target, and that's how those cells die. Actually, Candida is not the only cells that is sensitive to electrochemical current. So something that can directly affect the cell membrane. You have a bunch of cells, again, another type of pathogens that can also be affected by the electrochemical control. So here in these dots that I'm showing here at the center, that's almost killing that cell with that level of current almost by just 90%. But as the dot become here larger, basically you kill those cells to the extent of what quantity that you saw in this image that was shown in that growth dynamic. And we understand very well the mechanism of killing of those cells using the electrochemical current. So what the current does, the current perforates the cells, which creates cell leaking, but it can also generate some type of reactive oxygen species, and this creates oxidative stress on those cells so that things can easily diffuse into the cells, like what happened when the antibiotic finally diffused into the cells. Something else is that you have a formation of metal cation drug complexes, and those complexes, because of their affinity to the DNA, bind to the DNA and also lead to cell lysis or cell death. Something that we learn about the fact that a metal and a drug can bind is that now you can use that technology actually to form this type of nanocomposite material. So here I'm showing a nanoparticle, so it's about 20 nanometer. And it's made out of silica. So that ball that you see here is silica. But then we add nickel and we somehow coat nickel inside that ball. So the idea behind that is just nickel can bind with different drugs. And what we're allowed to do is that nanoparticle can easily sit on surface of the microbes. And as you can see here in this stem picture, you can see the double layer with the cell membrane of staph aureus here. And basically here you have nickel, you have silica. Basically everything can necessarily sit on those cells without having any effect. But guess what? When you have a drug that is bound actually to the nickel, then you start having this change into the cell function of those cells. Just as you can see here, you don't see that double layer anymore, but basically the cell function is completely altered, which means that cell death is caused as well. We start thinking about different techniques such as using some material that other microbes are making, functionalizing them actually with some carbon nanotubes. And that's something that we do in collaboration with Dr. Bileri. And then apply to that the tiny voltage. So the goal is really for us to create what we call some electrochemical bandages that you can put upon a wound and basically eradicate those cells as well. And the person who lead that effort in my lab was actually a high school student. So that's mean somebody who has to do his back in our Francophone system here. So our vision is really to move forward and start designing this type of devices to eradicate infection. Devices somehow that can potentiate the effect of the antibiotics whenever needed, that can depolarize the cell functions and then allow cell death to happen in order to clean a wound, for instance. So in addition to those devices that we're making, you can think about that as potential impact for patent and software, and that I'm not going to enter into detail when you come to that. But we start thinking about biofilm or bacteria in other contexts. And here the context that we're thinking about is all water interface, fluid interfaces. So here I have a video. And basically, if you start thinking about it, think about yourself seeing, maybe observing a glass of water, but maybe from above, right? And usually when you have a piece of hair falling on that water, what usually happens? It just sits there. It doesn't sink. Right? And we remember exactly what this phenomena is happening. It's just because of something that we call interfacial tension. So interfacial tension is something that traps objects that are extremely small, especially when they're sitting between fluid interfaces. So if you think about the reason why mosquitoes sit on water, it's just because of interfacial tension. The reason why gecko walk on water is just because of interfacial tension as well. So if you start paying attention to that, this is exactly the motion that those bacteria are experiencing. So they come together, and then very quickly, they start forming this film. And basically, this film has some interesting mechanical properties. So whenever you have all-water interface, air-water interface, actually, the microbes have the ability to form this type of material. And this material have interesting properties. So this has been illustrated in that publication where we think that the microbes are actually communicating among themselves to be able to form this type of membrane. But this membrane might have different function depending on the type of microbe. So imagine that you have a beneficial microbes, for instance, that form this type of membrane. It means that it's going to be probably for some good. But then if that's the microbes that cause an infection that form this kind of membrane, then you might be in trouble because it's precursor to actually huge biomass. And this kind of biomass is what you're going to see in the lung of cystic fibrosis patient, for instance, where basically in this particular environment, cells adhere to the air-water interface, and then they start making this film that go into a biofilm. So the way we study that, again, we use some interesting approaches. And here we're using what we call a pen and drop. So it's actually generating an oil droplet that we hold with a needle into a bacterial suspension. And just in 24 hours, you start seeing this kind of film being made. So the microbes has actually the ability to come together and start building this film. And those films basically have some type of interesting mechanical properties. But the thing to know about interfacial tension and how it does affect those cells is that if interfacial tension is able basically to hold a gecko that is that heavy, a mosquito that is even smaller, and bacteria that are even smaller than a mosquito, it means that these interfacial forces can somehow have some effect on those cells. And here, those two are actually Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and those two cells were actually isolated from a cystic fibrosis patient. But as you can see in B and D, basically they've been exposed to that interfacial environment that I just showed you. And you can see that the cells in B do not respond in a similar manner as the cell in D. The cell in B basically get lynched, they get damaged. So basically what the effect of the interfacial tension is manifested into those cells is like as if those cells are pulled apart and basically they start lysing. But as for the other one, it doesn't happen very often because they know exactly how to handle the interfacial tension. Basically, when they're exposed to the interfacial tension, what they do instead is that they start generating material. And that material is mostly polymer, and that allows them to survive this environment. The way we tend to explain that, think about rice. We just had some rice today, and think about sushi, or the rice that you use to make sushi. The reason that the rice that you use to make sushi stick together is just because of that ability to form that certain coating. That's going to be much more similar to the cells that I show below. As you apply a certain compression on this structure can stay forever. So imagine that in the lung of a cystic fibrosis patient, you start having those cells building up, growing. That means that it's going to be much more difficult to eradicate this type of infection with physical forces such as mechanical removal, for instance. So at this point, our vision start moving forward to start seeing what are those type of surfactant, biosurfactant that we can create just to make sure that we have a better control over those effective materials, especially when they start building in the lung. So some of them could be beneficial. This is going to be the example of the bacteria that we have on our skin. And every single day we expose them to some type of all-water interface to the lotion that we are applying on our skin. And they seem to be beneficial. Currently, there is no knowledge as to how this interfacial stress basically affect those cells and if they're really beneficial to us or not. In the case of bioremediation, this is also something of interest, and those cells can also be used actually as biomaterial. Now think about somebody who's vaping or maybe smoking. These tiny particles are there in the lung interface, and basically what is the impact of that on the type of biomass that also form? Can we use this actually as some type of therapy where we can have some tiny biological particles that we're going to refer to as phages or viruses that can somehow eliminate those biomass whenever they start forming the body? Now I'm going to talk about the last aspect of my research in the lab. Basically, we're going to develop something that we refer to the nanoculture. So it's an innovative way of cultivating microbes. The idea behind that is that we're trying to get closer to what the human microbiome is. So if you think about the idea of a microbiome, it's all the cells that we have on our body and in our body, and mostly the microorganism that we have. So actually, the microorganism that we have in our body are 30 times much more than the cells that we have as human, right? So that means that we're more microbes than human. So if you think about that, maybe the way even you're thinking is much more dominated by microbes. And basically, that's the state of science today when it comes to this discovery that the microbes that we have in our stomach, can affect our mind, the way that we're thinking. The amount of microbes that we have actually on our skin can also affect the way that we respond to different type of pathogens, especially when they adhere to our skin during acne, for instance. So for most of these microbes that we have in our body, if you were just to cultivate that, and that the new antibiotics seem to be extremely effective against multiple gram-positive bacteria. So if you think about that, that discovery of a new antibiotic was just because they were exploiting what we refer to as a microbial warfare, the way that microbes fight against each other. If you remember, that's how actually Fleming discovered penicillin, because one microbes are fighting the other one. So if we are able somehow to screen most of the microbes that exist in our body, we're going to realize that many of them actually protect us against many diseases because they secrete some type of metabolite that affect the growth of the pathogen. Same thing that the microbe that exists in seawater, in soil, and basically our goal was really to make something similar. So we came up with this that we refer to as the nanoculture. The micro droplet, as you can see here, and they can sequester different microbial cells, microbial species. As you can see here, the thickness of these are just 100 microns in diameter. So if you think about that, that's the same thickness as your hair. So it's very tiny capsules that can really have a bunch of cells. The way we make that is basically a very interesting platform. We use a microfluidics system. And if you think about that, it's like what you did when you were a kid, when you were blowing soap bubble. Basically, you have a membrane, you blow soap, and then you end up being a capsule, if you want to think about that. So basically here, what we have is a PDMS membrane introducing actually the bacterial suspension into that PDMS membrane. And because of the surfactant that we have outside, it remains somehow a capsules. PDMS is something that can cross-link. So depending on the growth condition of the cells, it become actually solid capsules. Then you can put this into the growth condition of those cells and observe them going in real time. So as these cells go, basically what you can do, you can reconstruct the microenvironment here. So we've been developing this technology as a new way of cultivating microorganisms, and definitely as a new way of cultivating microorganisms where they belong to. So we went on by functionalizing those microcapsules, so we know exactly the chemistry of a polymer. We can even make them magnetize, and we can even cultivate different type of microbes in different type of conditions. But further than whatever was done before by the group at Northeastern, we're using this platform as a means of studying microbial interaction. So that's one-on-one dynamics during that microbial warfare. We're trying to study that directly into this platform so that if there's new antibiotic that some of the special microbes are making, we might be able to identify them. And even go further by using this platform as a way of delivering a new microbial community that could be beneficial to somehow manipulate the human microbiome. So in terms of what we do to magnetize those capsules, for instance, we're introducing some tiny nanoparticles into the shell of these microcapsules. And as you can see here, you simply put a magnet and you're able to recollect it. One of the ideas behind that is just that if it is in the soil, it's so small that you might be able, it will be difficult for you to fish those type of microcapsules. So basically we functionalize them. We can go further and then start studying this one-on-one interaction between two different type of cells. So here you have a green versus a red. This is Staph versus Pseudomonas. We can get a closer picture of them, very uniform in the way that they're going, and see exactly what this dynamic here is in terms of the representation of this microbe. For instance, the green one seems to be much more compared to the red one, meaning that the green one are dominating this type of growth in this co-culture system. Now we went one step further. Instead of just putting two microbes and studying them together, we developed actually a cocktail of gut-isolated microbes. So if you think about that, whenever you digest and basically you go to the bathroom, this has a bunch of microorganisms. And those microorganisms, they're not necessarily bad. Actually, they're good because they help us digest food, right? But then think about food poisoning and the end part of food poisoning, right? It's just a huge change, what we refer to as dysbiosis, a huge change in these microbial dynamics in your gut. So if you're able to have somehow a good signature of this healthy microbiome in your gut, you'll be able to get something that's going to be similar to probiotics and keep that. And whenever an infection is present, basically use this type of human-derived probiotics to deliver that. So recently we acquired a US patent on that. So our idea goes much further than just studying cells in a manner that has been done before, just using a culture flask of the agar plate, just one cell at a time. We want to be able somehow to squeeze all these human microbiome into different type of capsules. But then we went further by the science that if there's any way that pathogen could be present, what we like to do, we like to be able to identify that and use the technology that's going to be closer to my facial recognition. The same way, for instance, that when you have your phone, you can open that with your face. We're thinking about using some type of visualization to recognize actually when pathogen is present. And one way of doing that is that the capsule and the system that we develop allow us, for instance, to take an image at different time points to see how those cells are growing here. And we can represent that to see exactly what's the growth dynamic within those capsules. But something else that we can do, for instance, we can select one time point like here at 8 hours, and then observe when those cells are moving and see the trajectory of those cells. And because we know exactly how each one of these cells are moving, we might be able to establish different type of parameter related to one particular microbial species that move, for instance, according to a certain velocity or maybe according to a certain mean square displacement. And eventually what we're building now at CMU is actually some type of AI or machine learning process in which we're trying to curves and see what the signature of each one is and see how that signature change depending on the presence of pathogen or not. So this is our vision really with this type of new technology that we're developing. We like to get away from a culture flask. We like to be able to encapsulate those microbes into tiny compartments that we can dissimulate anywhere. We can put them into a biological system. We can put that into a gut of an animal, which we're doing currently in our animal testing. We can put that in soil. We can put that in different environments just to be able to replicate the growth of those cells. So the last portion really of this talk, after discussing what my research has been so far, is other stuff that really push toward innovation. And that's going to be just a reflection here. We think that if innovation has to happen, nobody should be working in silos, right? So basically, we're not just knowing every single thing to simply say that we're good enough to do everything by ourselves. We talk about the human microbiome, where the gut of a mouse, for instance, has only alone has about 700 species. So to study this interaction, you can imagine that it takes a very long time to do so. So if this technology should be available to anybody who need that, definitely that's something we're willing to come and present that and show and teach people really how to use that. And basically that's where this kind of collaboration comes from. And this shows exactly what this global initiative is on my end when it comes to really show the technology that we're developing in our lab. And we're not necessarily shish when it comes to showing that to people. We go to different places, presenting our work. Whoever need that, basically we're trying to make that technology available to them. For instance, Grenoble is a part of town where basically I spend some of my time as a postdoc. I'll go back there and basically bring some students and teach them so that they can teach others how to use this platform. Again, Côte d'Ivoire, this is where I'm from. And basically, I'm trying to create some type of collaboration to help people think about those type of innovations. I came here last year. That was exactly in December. And I had a chance to visit also ESF. And when I came, I went to Daust. And as part of that visit, it was just because in other places, such as in Brazil, they're more than happy to bring them their students. And those faculty members are extremely dynamic, really, when it comes to that. So with the talk that we heard today from the president, we know exactly that he's willing to invest into science when it comes to Senegal. And that's the reason that this first meeting is happening here. What on your hand can you do really to facilitate that collaboration? Because we're ready to work. We're ready to invest our time and to make the trip whenever necessary, really to help you move the ladder to the other side. So this will require some funding. And on our end, we have to apply to different type of funding opportunity. In the US, for instance, we have NSF, we have NIH, we have different organizations that really gave us money to make sure that we can enable this research. And sometimes it helps us fund different students, really. But if there's some fund that will be local, where we need to apply with you to secure those funds, we'd be more than happy to do that. The Gates Foundation really supports different initiatives in Africa, and I think that that's something we can definitely work on that as well. So as you interact with different faculty members, especially those coming from the US or maybe from different countries than Senegal, please make sure that you're open to these options of talking to them, because that's not how innovation will happen if we're also silent. about the capability that other people have. So as take-home message, something that I will say here is that innovation will not happen if we don't identify opportunities, if we don't identify problems and come forward to solve them. That's something that I started doing as a student and was able to lead a company later on. And I feel like here at the earlier age, anybody can really start thinking about what is that problem that will be much more appropriate to tackle now based on the reality that you guys are facing here and anywhere else. Then this is going to lead to cutting edge technology or cutting edge research. And you should not be afraid to collaborate with people that can really help you to achieve this goal. It's going to mean that you're going to have to train new students. And as you train those students, they also got to train other students so that the circle basically continue. So we don't want to be that faculty member that stay forever and want to monopolize really a lab, right? We want to be able to share that knowledge and make sure that everything should be solved collaboratively. And that's the last point here that I'm going to show in terms of engaging into this collaboration and make sure that you facilitate them. Right? Do not be afraid to simply reach out, and that's how innovation happens. With this, I will show you a picture of what my lab looked like for most of the images that you guys saw. And I'm happy to take any questions you guys have.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, there won't be question because it was a keynote speech. There won't be question actually because we are a little late and it was just a keynote speech. I'm going to have my co-moderator sum up in 2 minutes what she heard and what she get from your talk for the audience.
Thank you. I hope I will be able to do this in 3 minutes, but I think it was already said quite beautifully at the end that one of the main things to get from this presentation is that when you have an idea, you have to know you don't have to know exactly how to solve that idea, but you have to have some sort of direction and some sort of guidance of where you're going. So you started with your company where you created this door handle solution, which is a problem that I actually also have when I go to the bathroom. How do I open the door? But then you also thought this is a problem that people can figure out on their own. How else, how more can my knowledge on this topic help on other solutions? And that's, you got through all of your research and everything that has to do with biomaterials and antimicrobial coating, which is something that is quite important to get, especially with the antibiotic drug resistance that is present. So also, I think something that is good to take home is that there is not one way to solve the same issue. One way would be that other researchers might look at other drugs, for example. Another way is to look, which is very interesting, at what microbes we even have and how can we harness the power of those microbes to solve the issues. So thank you very much for your talk. I think it was quite interesting. And I hope that if any of you in the audience have any questions, you can always go to the speaker later on.
Thank you.
I think I was right to bring her on stage to be my co-moderator. Actually, we should innovate for the future, and you have to set the future with those who are going to make the future the youth. And we're going to rethink the university, taking it from the research end and going to teaching, not only on the teaching track and letting aside the research track. So thank you very much for this outstanding speech. And again, thank you for the organizers, invite us to be part of it. Thank you very much.
Nice.
Thank you.
You're also.
Thank you.
De Côte d'Ivoire.
Oui.
Je serai dans 10 jours.
Voilà, bonjour, bonjour tout le monde. Nous allons démarrer la session suivante. Donc, nous appelons Madame Awanyai. Je ne sais pas si elle est là. Docteur Cissé Badara. Madame Awanyai est là. Ok, donc il y a chez M. Franck Tiambo. Donc voilà, donc nous allons suivre le panel qui a pour thème l'avenir de la santé numérique, explorer les technologies et les tendances. Et moi, je suis le docteur Tidjane Gadiaga, je suis au niveau du ministère de la Santé et de l'Action sociale et je suis le responsable du système national d'information sanitaire. Donc pour cet après-midi, nous avons 4 orateurs. Nous allons d'abord passer la parole à M. Tiambo qui va parler des aspects sur la santé numérique.
Oui. Chacun son tour, c'est ça. Ok, n'osez pas en bas à tout le monde.
Ok, bon, puisque nous avons accusé un peu de retard, parce que nous avons accusé 1 heure de temps de retard, j'aurais proposé quand même qu'on fasse passer les 4 orateurs. Ensuite, s'il y a des questions, on pourra les prendre très rapidement. Tiambo, si vous avez une présentation, vous pouvez la dérouler.
Merci beaucoup, docteur. Je ne sais pas si l'équipe technique peut du coup mettre ma présentation. Il n'y en a pas? Bon, on va faire sans présentation, ce sera plus rapide. Donc, pour commencer, je vais me présenter. Je suis Franck Tiambo, le cofondateur de la start-up numérique en santé qui s'appelle Kimbocare, qui est basée en Suisse, qui a des opérations dans 3 pays en Afrique, aussi bien en Afrique de l'Ouest, en Côte d'Ivoire et au Cameroun, et de l'autre côté, en Afrique de l'Est, au Kenya. Donc, en termes de background, je suis actuaire, donc expert en gestion de risque pour les compagnies d'assurance et les banques. Et j'ai également une expérience de consulting de plus d'une dizaine d'années avec le cabinet international Deloitte. Donc, je pense qu'aujourd'hui, je suis dans le cadre de cette biennale. Merci beaucoup pour l'organisation, pour l'invitation. Et durant ces prochaines minutes, j'aimerais présenter Kimbocare, quelles sont les nouvelles technologies qu'on va pouvoir mettre en place pour améliorer la transparence et la qualité dans la livraison des soins de santé dans notre beau continent. Donc, j'avais prévu une belle présentation. Malheureusement, on ne l'aura pas. Mais en gros, on est parti d'une problématique et d'une vision axée autour de 2 points. Le premier point, c'est la transparence et le second point sera la qualité. On a eu beaucoup de chance. On va partir d'une approche vraiment super pragmatique parce que nous sommes des entrepreneurs et on va partir sur le cas de nos 2 premiers clients et patients. Donc, je vais pouvoir partir de cette histoire pour vous expliquer comment on a pu déceler un problème qui existait, un problème qu'on a compris qui n'était pas que lié à ces 2 personnes, qui est un problème global. Et ensuite, au fil de l'eau, durant ma présentation, je vais vous montrer la solution qu'on a pu implémenter et ainsi les perspectives au niveau de cette solution. Donc, la problématique, elle est toute simple. Peut-être je vais commencer par poser une question à l'audience. Est-ce que des personnes de l'audience ont une personne à l'étranger, donc quelqu'un qui est hors du Sénégal? Il faut juste lever la main. Génial. Je vois qu'on a tous presque des personnes à l'étranger. Donc, je vais partir du cas de figure de Ismaël. Ismaël qui vit en Suisse avec moi et a une bonne dizaine, quinzaine d'années, et qui s'occupait de sa cousine Diane qui vivait en Côte d'Ivoire. Et donc, en réalité, Ismaël supportait sa famille et supporte toujours vraiment sa famille, et notamment Diane, et notamment sur les problèmes de santé qu'avait Diane. À l'époque, la seule alternative qu'avait Ismaël pour offrir des soins de qualité à Diane, c'était d'envoyer de l'argent en utilisant des moyens de transfert d'argent. Il a toujours fait avec beaucoup d'enthousiasme, mais s'est rendu compte très rapidement qu'il avait une difficulté majeure. C'est qu'une fois que l'argent était envoyé, il n'avait aucune notion de comment l'argent était utilisé. Est-ce que Diane recevait effectivement ou pas ces fameux soins de qualité? Donc, on est vraiment parti sur ce constat que le manque de transparence pourrait empêcher Ismaël d'aider sa cousine Diane, et on a commencé à faire des études de marché pour se rendre compte à quel point ce problème était réel, était palpable. Donc, c'est très rapidement rendu compte que ce problème n'était pas qu'un problème d'Ismaël. On s'est rendu compte que ce problème intervenait beaucoup dans tous les pays avec des ressources limitées, des ressources financières limitées. Et donc, en partir de 2018-2019, on a décidé de s'attaquer à ce problème avec mon parcours en assurance et dans la fraude, la prévention de fraude à grande échelle. On a mis en place une solution de santé numérique qui s'appelle donc Kimbocare. Donc, KimboCare, c'est une technologie qui va vous permettre de garantir la traçabilité des soins de santé qui ont été délivrés à un patient. Vous savez exactement qu'elle arrive à l'hôpital, quel type de parcours de soins il aura au sein de cet hôpital, avec la qualité de service et surtout le bon niveau de coût. Donc, avec cette technologie-là, aujourd'hui, on a déjà servi une bonne quinzaine de milliers de patients. On est actif, comme je le disais en préambule, dans 3 pays africains. Et peut-être quand je vais récupérer la parole, je pourrais vous dire quelles sont les technologies issues des laboratoires de l'École polytechnique en Suisse qu'on a pu implémenter pour pouvoir résoudre ce problème de transparence et de qualité à grande échelle. Bon, apparemment, la présentation vient d'arriver. Je ne vais pas refaire tout le pitch. Je ne sais pas si j'ai... Ouais, merci. Bon, c'est aussi une des valeurs de KimboCare, hein, la capacité à s'adapter rapidement à toutes les situations. Donc, je ne vais pas revenir sur toute la présentation. Je pense que vous connaissez déjà tout ce qui est programme de crédit carbone, notamment pour améliorer l'action des hommes sur la planète. Et donc, récemment, à Times Square à New York, on a eu KimboCare qui présentait justement ce que je viens de vous expliquer, les crédits de santé. Donc, les crédits de santé, c'est ce concept qui permet de garantir la transparence sur les soins médicaux délivrés à un patient ou à un groupe de patients. Et comme je le disais, je ne vais pas revenir. Je ne vais pas revenir, mais je vais étendre le cas d'Ismaël et de Diane. Là, je vous avais parlé du modèle individuel où une personne achetait des soins de santé pour une autre personne et on s'est très vite rendu compte avec notre technologie que des entreprises, des agences de développement étaient également très intéressées à avoir une meilleure transparence dans les programmes de santé qu'ils avaient pour les populations. Et vraiment, dans notre vision, on a mené aussi nos études de marché. En termes de moyens financiers, il ne manque pas de moyens financiers pour résoudre pas mal de problèmes de santé. Mais la difficulté actuelle, c'est que en termes de structuration de ces moyens financiers, en termes d'efficacité et d'efficience de ces moyens financiers, on n'arrive pas encore à résoudre tous ces problèmes. Donc, on peut voir là un panel de nos différents clients. Ce sont des clients qui sont des multinationales, qui ont des programmes de santé à travers plusieurs régions du monde et qui viennent vers nous parce qu'effectivement, ils veulent avoir un peu plus de clarté sur comment est utilisé l'argent, avoir plus de clarté sur leur impact. Vous savez qu'il y a une nouvelle réglementation au niveau de la responsabilité sociale des entreprises, dont les entreprises doivent vraiment montrer et démontrer qu'elles ont un véritable impact sur la société et dont ces entreprises sont des pionnières dans ce domaine-là. Donc, c'est une des raisons pour laquelle j'ai beaucoup apprécié l'invitation aussi de l'IBAS et du professeur Suleiman Boub, parce que c'est également une histoire de famille. Je suis Chief Operation Officer et ma sœur est la CEO. Elle a un parcours assez similaire au mien et elle est basée à New York. Et en gros, on a une équipe d'une quinzaine de personnes réparties dans différents pays entre la Côte d'Ivoire, le Kenya et le Cameroun. Voilà, je m'arrête là pour l'instant et si le temps me permet, je pourrais vous parler plus des technologies qu'on utilise pour pouvoir amener cette transparence et cette qualité à l'échelle, pas pour 20 000 personnes, pas pour 1 million de personnes, mais pour 100 voire 1 milliard de personnes. Merci.
Ok, merci beaucoup Franck pour cette présentation sur les nouvelles technologies qui permettent d'améliorer la transparence et la livraison de soins surtout. Maintenant, nous passons la parole à Madame la docteure Stella, qui va également partager avec nous une présentation. Si docteur Mohamed Moustapha Diouf et Awan Ndiaye sont là, ils peuvent nous rejoindre au podium. Non. OK.
All right, wonderful. My name is Dr. Stella Kivila. I am in the digital health space. I am the outgoing regional head of Baobab Circle. I've been leading 7 African countries in East and Central Africa. I do not speak French, but I know it will be translated here. All right, so the topic today is about the future of digital health. And we want to think about the different trends that have been emerging in the last few years. So Frank has done an amazing job really explaining what Kimboke is all about. I'll give you our experience and what we have been seeing in the market since we launched in 2016. And a few things that I want us to start thinking about, and it just goes back to my story. So in 2015, I lost my father to complications of diabetes and hypertension. So just by a show of hand, I want to see, I'm not going to ask you whether you have diabetes or hypertension. I'm going to ask you whether you have ever lost a loved one to hypertension and diabetes, with a show of hands. Okay, a few hands. Okay, thank you very much. And really sorry about that. So in 2015, I'm a pharmacist by training. I'm supposed to be saving lives, yet I lost my father to complications of diabetes and hypertension. Now, in Africa, the focus has always been on communicable diseases. We think about malaria, we think about TB, we think about HIV and AIDS, but then we think about non-communicable diseases, including diabetes and hypertension, as a Western problem. So some of the things I want us to think about is the burden of disease. There's a shift in Africa. What never used to be a problem in our part of the world is currently a big problem. And we have to start paying attention because the data is telling us something very different from what we knew before. Now, you may ask, what does digital have to do with it? It has everything to do with it. Let's start from the numbers. I am based in Uganda. 1 in 4 people are dying, have hypertension. 1 in 4 people. And I've observed the statistics across Africa. It's no different. So just count 1 to 4 people next to you and ask yourselves who's at risk of getting hypertension. Okay, so I see 4 people seated next to each other. So I don't know who's at risk, and you can't even tell by just looking at them, right? So that's the thing, it's a silent killer. The statistics are also showing us that the average age of people who are living with diabetes is actually a younger population. So we have to start thinking about the demographics as well. So the average age of people living with diabetes in Uganda is 35 years old. According to the UN, you're still classified as a young person. So digital has everything to do with it. And this is why, if you combine those 2 issues, you have the burden of disease changing in Africa, you have the demographic changing in Africa, then at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, are we delivering care the way it's supposed to be delivered? And therefore, if you think about the other trends that we've been seeing, is that there's been a rising smartphone penetration at the same time. So you have the burden of disease shifting. You equally have a younger demographic. 70% of the population in Africa is under the age of 35 years old. So if you're going to think about how we are delivering care from a brick and mortar system, it has to change, right? So smartphone penetration is increasingly high. In Kenya, SIM card penetration is over 100%. It's actually like 102%. In Uganda, we have around 32 million people who own a mobile phone. So then M-Health is another trend we have to start thinking about. So if we're expecting these young people to come to hospital, we may actually not get the disease in the right space. So at the end of the day, how are we making sure that as you're seated there, we can be able to deliver health to you? So mobile health is very important. Which infrastructure are we using? Let's use the mobile technology. Out of all the technologies that we are seeing, mobile becomes very feasible because right now, I'm sure all of you have a mobile phone. And that's the reason why we choose mobile as the vehicle to be able to change how we're delivering healthcare. The other trend linked to that, we have to start thinking about if we're looking at the burden of disease shifting from communicable diseases to non-communicable diseases, the pillars that support this are very different. We have two components. We have prevention and we also have management. When it comes to prevention, what are some of the things that we have seen? We must be able to nudge behavioral change on a daily basis. And so at the end of the day, it's very okay to bring people, convene people into a space like this and give them a nutritional talk, teach them how to eat, teach them how to manage their lifestyle, teach them how to sort out their mental health, teach them how to be able to manage stress and so on and so forth. But you'll all agree with me, after this scientific conference, you'll live on a high. Everybody is very excited at the end of the day when they get information. But what happens tomorrow? They go back to factory settings. So at the end of the day, we have to start rethinking how we are delivering the information. And that is where technology comes in. We have to start thinking about personalized healthcare. And I know after this, we have a session by an expert in Roche, being able to deliver personalization of healthcare in that same space. Because what works for me and what works for somebody else, what works for Frank is very different. So how do we personalize the coaching? How do we make sure that it is consistent? How are we able to make sure that we are delivering healthcare in small bits that can be able to nudge behavioral change? Let us start thinking about AI. AI has been a conversation that we've had for a very long time, but we can use AI for good when we can be able to personalize healthcare, personalize nutritional coaching, personalized lifestyle management, and so on. So that is what we have been able to learn in terms of how do we nudge behavioral change to prevent and also manage non-communicable diseases. Now, the second thing we have to think about is how are we making sure that we are data-driven in the consultations that we have. Now, you'll all agree with me in Africa, the healthcare systems are very strained. If you look at the universal health coverage agenda that is across all African continents, we have to start thinking about what's the ratio between a healthcare worker to the population. According to WHO, the ideal is one healthcare worker should be tagged to 1,000 people in the population. I'll give you statistics from where I come from. That is 1 to 11,000. So we have a huge gap in terms of accessibility of healthcare. And also that drives the costs up. And I'm sure it's the same thing across all African countries. We're not producing enough healthcare providers to match the population growth. So what are we going to start thinking about? We have to start thinking about how do we collect data in a comprehensive format. The truth of the matter is we don't have enough doctors, we don't have enough facilities, but that phone can be the hospital, that phone can be the doctor, that phone can be the place whereby we are collecting data. When we are managing diabetes and hypertension, data is very critical because we need to measure whether your blood pressure control is okay. So how do we do that? We give you an exercise book and we tell you record the readings on a daily basis. And our goal in Baobab Circle is we want to replace the exercise book. And how do we replace the exercise book? We give you the same platform. of a mobile application for you to be able to enter your data. And the same data can be tracked by your doctor in real time. So the doctor who is based in Senegal can be able to get your data when you're based in Uganda. So all those records are in one place, even if you move from one hospital to another. Why? Because data is king in 2023. Going to 2024. So data is a great component that we have to start thinking about. And this fragmentation of data, because we are piling up files in clinics, when somebody moves to a new place, they lose that data and they have to start afresh. We can be able to mitigate that through remote patient monitoring, and we can be able to collect all that data in the same platform, the mobile phone. So that's something that we have to start thinking about. Lastly, we have to start thinking about how do we enable the connection between a patient and the provider. We have to think about telemedicine in a very different format. Just in our conversation over lunch with a few colleagues, we were thinking about what makes adoption necessary in our part of the world. The truth of the matter is that some of these things and some of these issues that we think are very okay for us to discuss are actually taboo in other places. Talk about mental health. What we've been able to say is telemedicine is not a one size that fits all. We have to make sure that we have different platforms within different options within the telemedicine infrastructure to be able to deliver this care. And so what we have been able to design is we can be able to have teleconsultation in text and voice. Why text? Because today more than ever, sexual and reproductive health, I told you that we have a young demographic. They don't want to put a face to it when they're talking about sexual and reproductive health issues. Therefore, everybody wants to be a keyboard warrior. And then secondly is that I don't want to be able to put a voice to it. So at the end of the day, I want my privacy to be intact. So text becomes very, very critical, especially for the younger demographic. And then we have what everybody knows, calling a doctor. Calling a doctor, very good, especially for the older generation, the older demographic who are okay in terms of having these discussions around different things. So the three pillars that I have just mentioned is that we have to think about how do we personalize coaching through AI? How do we make sure that we are doing remote patient monitoring to enable data-driven solutions and data-driven consultations? And finally, how can we rethink telemedicine to create this ecosystem, to create these multi-dimensional digital platforms that we can be able to make sure that you prevent another death like my father. As I conclude, I know Professor Tagbo mentioned that collaboration is king, and you cannot do this alone. What we have learned is that it takes so different sectors to be able to deliver the whole goal about improving patient outcomes. I'll give you an example. We all talk about digital. We can be in the labs, the tech people, software engineers will come up with the best app in the world. I've talked to you about smartphone penetration being a very important piece of information for us to leverage smartphones or leverage mobile phones to deliver healthcare. But there are so many barriers that we face. For example, people have phones, but what is a smartphone penetration? I have just told you that we have a SIM card penetration of 101.2% in Kenya. That means it's very easy for everyone to actually have a mobile phone. That means actually people have more than one mobile phone. In Uganda, I've just told you over 32 million people own a mobile phone. From where you sit, you think that is amazing. There's no challenge until I tell you the internet penetration. Most of our population is actually living in rural settings. So we have to make sure that we're having discussions with the telcos and the internet providers to make it cheaper, to make it more accessible. The other thing we have to start thinking about is the regulators. You will agree with me from an innovation perspective, we run faster than the regulator. Till today, the government of Ministry of Health around the world, and I thank the Ministry of Health in Senegal to being at the forefront of championing for innovation, is that we're still clashing with the regulators because they don't really quite understand what innovation can be able to do to pivot some of the things that we are doing in the healthcare space. So we have to involve the regulator not only at the tail end of innovation, but most importantly, we have to involve them from the start as we build these solutions. Think about when you think about different sectors coming to the table. Today, we have agriculture coming to the table under the One Health umbrella. We cannot win this war alone. So a multi-sectoral approach in terms of improving patient outcomes is very, very critical. Thank you so much.
Merci, docteur Stella, donc, pour ce partage d'expérience sur la santé numérique. Il était prévu pour ce panel 4 orateurs, mais les 2 ne sont pas là. Mais puisque nous avons également dans l'audience quelqu'un qui a beaucoup d'expérience en matière de santé numérique au Sénégal, je veux parler du docteur Ibrahima Khaliloudia, donc, qui est le coordonnateur de tout ce qui est santé digitale, mais également de la carte sanitaire et de l'Observatoire pour la santé au Sénégal. Donc, vous me permettrez peut-être de lui donner la parole pour quelques commentaires par rapport à la santé numérique au Sénégal, avant peut-être d'ouvrir des débats s'il y a d'autres commentaires ou des questions qu'on va prendre. Docteur Dia.
Merci beaucoup, merci pour la parole. Je vais juste continuer à aiguiser votre appétit par rapport à ce sujet qui est très important. Dire ce qui se passe au niveau mondial, que tous les grands pays s'organisent pour pouvoir être leaders dans ce domaine-là. Même en Afrique, des pays commencent à s'organiser, à renforcer leur organigramme pour créer des structures fortes pour gérer la santé numérique. On a aussi au niveau mondial l'OMS et l'UIT qui ont pris des résolutions demandant aux pays d'avoir des stratégies de santé digitale. Et il faut dire aussi qu'il y a la guerre des données que vous suivez entre les grandes puissances, et ces données-là, il y a les données de santé qui sont des fois même plus confidentielles que les données militaires. Et là aussi, il y a un enjeu très, très important. Nous avons la situation de la qualité des données et de la sécurité, également des soins. Et tout ça aussi, nous le vivons. Depuis la COVID, on a vu des gens qui ont pris des vaccins différents, alors que ce n'était pas conseillé à un certain moment, parce que le système de santé n'était pas en mesure de savoir que telle personne a pris tel vaccin, ne devrait pas prendre un autre. On parle aujourd'hui d'intelligence artificielle, mais pour l'instant, l'Afrique subit. L'Afrique ne fait que prendre les solutions qui viennent de l'étranger. Ça veut dire aussi que nous devons nous avoir des données massives de qualité pour qu'on ait quand même des algorithmes basés sur nos propres données. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, nous prenons les algos des autres pays que nous utilisons ici au Sénégal. Je terminerai par aussi aujourd'hui, combien de fois ici dans la salle, quelqu'un est parti à l'hôpital, amener son enfant, on lui demande est-ce que l'enfant est venu une fois ici à l'hôpital? On est tellement gêné qu'on va dire non. Et pourtant l'enfant était venu, mais on a perdu les documents. On a perdu les anciens documents médicaux. À chaque fois, on lui crée un numéro et il ne bénéficie jamais de l'ensemble de ces documents médicaux. Donc, il y a tellement de choses que nous pouvons faire. Au Sénégal, nous, on avance. On a une stratégie, on a un programme qui a été validé par le gouvernement du Sénégal. On a un financement de la Banque mondiale et le projet va démarrer. Et l'idée, c'est de donner aux Sénégalais un dossier patient électronique qu'on appelle portable. Ça veut dire que vous pouvez aller n'importe où au niveau du territoire pouvoir y accéder. Il y a également dans le projet une partie de télémédecine. On va connecter des centres de santé au niveau de certains hôpitaux. Également veiller à ce que les systèmes puissent communiquer. Voilà ce que je voulais partager. Je vous remercie.
Voilà, merci, docteur Dia. Je pense que votre intervention est très importante quand même pour le cas spécifique du Sénégal. Maintenant, nous allons peut-être ouvrir, nous avons 5 minutes. S'il y a des personnes qui souhaitent poser quelques questions ou des commentaires également, la liste elle est ouverte. C'est bon, pas de questions? Une fois? Pas de questions deux fois? Ok, donc nous... Vous voulez intervenir? Ah, ok, il y a 2 questions, ok. Est-ce qu'il y a un autre micro baladeur?
Merci. Bonsoir à tous, bonsoir aux membres du panel. Merci pour cette très belle présentation. J'ai une question qui concerne le domaine de la télémédecine parce que c'est assez important, c'est innovant, mais il y a une question que je me pose souvent regardant la prescription des médicaments. Généralement, quand tu pars à l'hôpital, tu consultes un médecin, après on te donne une ordonnance pour que tu achètes les médicaments. Disons que je consulte en ligne. Lorsque le médecin me fait une prescription d'ordonnance, est-ce que vous avez pensé à ajouter cette technologie-là, cette idée de telle sorte que si je fais la consultation à la maison, que je puisse avoir, que ce soit à la maison ou dans des zones reculées d'ailleurs, que je puisse avoir les médicaments chez moi. Sinon, si je dois sortir pour aller acheter les médicaments en pharmacie, vu que je sors déjà, c'est comme autant aller à l'hôpital, prendre ma consultation et j'ai l'ordonnance et j'achète les médicaments en pharmacie directement et je rentre chez moi. Vu que la télémédecine apporte cette possibilité de rester chez soi, de consulter à distance, est-ce que vous avez déjà pensé à ce côté des médicaments?
Ok, vous pouvez passer le micro derrière. Oui, c'est important, tout à fait. Donc, si vous pouvez vous présenter.
Ok, je m'appelle Brice Kébéré. Je suis ingénieur en génie mécanique, option robotique. Je travaille au sein de l'IRSF au niveau du département de l'innovation et je travaille sur un projet qui consiste à fabriquer un robot pour aider les médecins et les biologistes en laboratoire pour faire les échantillonnages, la dispension de liquides réactifs. Nous avons construit un prototype qui marche déjà bien. Nous avons fait la démonstration au niveau de notre stand ce matin. J'espère que vous allez pouvoir passer pour voir ce qu'on a fait. C'est bien et il y a d'autres projets aussi qu'on a au niveau du stand. Vous pourrez visiter. Merci.
Ok, merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Je suis docteur Gino Salif, je travaille pour le laboratoire Roche. Je suis intéressé un peu pour le projet qui se passe au Sénégal. Tout à l'heure, docteur Stella a parlé de la réglementation. C'est l'un des piliers importants de la digitalisation, c'est-à-dire comment on s'assure que les réglementations vont suivre toute cette flambée d'innovation dans tous les pays. Et aussi, nous, le laboratoire Roche, on travaille aussi dans la médecine personnalisée, mais cette médecine personnalisée ne peut se réaliser que dans un environnement régularisé. C'est-à-dire, au niveau du Sénégal, je veux savoir quelles sont les initiatives qui accompagnent toute cette transformation, toutes ces innovations. Et l'autre question aussi que j'ai, c'est la sécurisation des données. Tout à l'heure, le représentant du Sénégal a parlé des données militaires et autres. Mais il faut savoir aussi que les données sanitaires aussi sont des données qui peuvent être utilisées pour pouvoir fragiliser des pays. On a vu dans certains pays qui ont des taux de pénétration très importants au niveau du digital, lorsqu'il y a des hackings, tout le système est bloqué. Mais nos pays qui sont encore fragiles, comment on s'assure que toutes ces données qui vont être disponibles sur le digital, dans les appareils, comment est-ce qu'on les sécurise? Voilà, quelles sont les initiatives qui sont mises à côté sur le plan institutionnel mais aussi sur le plan de la formation pour qu'on ait vraiment des génies informatiques pour pouvoir sécuriser toutes ces données, milliards de données qui seront disponibles dans le cloud. Merci beaucoup.
Ok, merci. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres intervenants? Bon, on prend la dernière liste hein, parce que également nous sommes un peu pris par le temps. Donc, on va prendre juste 2 intervenants. Oui, allez-y. Vous vous présentez d'abord.
D'accord, je m'appelle Abdulrahim Diallo. Pertinent de cette question, en fait, je suis software engineer à Kaiser Permanente, qui est une entreprise privée aux États-Unis d'où on prend subvention au niveau du gouvernement. Donc, je voulais savoir, l'un de mes tasks, c'est de développer des frameworks pour aider les patients à avoir du digital care. Il paraît que vous êtes en train de faire pareil. Donc, je voulais savoir que une des choses qu'on fait, c'est on pense à le proactive care. C'est-à-dire, on n'attend pas que quelqu'un tombe malade pour aller à l'hôpital, mais le sens inverse. Par exemple, il y a des devices comme les montres ou bien des devices dans la maison qui permettent de détecter, par exemple, si la personne ne fait pas de mouvement. Et ensuite, ça va envoyer des messages au docteur. Donc, vous êtes en train de faire, vous êtes en train de penser à donner des services comme ça, faire du care réactif, c'est-à-dire que le patient va tomber malade pour aller avant de, avant de donner vos services. Merci.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Martin. Sorry, I don't speak French. I hope they will interpret. Just a question to the panel. What do you see the role of digital health in Africa in the next 50 years? Also to that, what role will digital health play in delivering value-based healthcare through social determinants of healthcare, given the fact that we don't have, most of our public health systems are donor funded? What is the role of digital health in moving away from donor funds to creating value-based healthcare? Secondly, with a move to dissolve the borders within Africa, what will be the role of digital health in enabling access to healthcare for people on the continent across their jurisdiction? If I'm from Uganda and have a medical emergency, how will digital health enable me to access care in Senegal? And how will that framework be developed to enable that in the next couple of years? Thank you.
Donc, on va prendre cette fois-ci la dernière liste. Apparemment, donc, les débats sont très intéressants, mais quand même, il va falloir qu'on gère un peu de temps.
Ok, merci. Non, il est vrai qu'à entendre les discussions s'enchaîner, ça suscite le débat. Moi, il y avait deux questions. Christophe Rochigneux, je suis pharmacien, Expertise France, donc filiale du groupe AFD, Agence française de développement. On travaille beaucoup avec les ministères de la Santé dans la sous-région francophone, UMOA, CEMAC, sur le renforcement de la régulation du secteur pharmaceutique, qui est une question cruciale. Et je crois que quelqu'un disait que l'innovation aurait toute sa place si les secteurs de la santé, de l'agriculture sont bien régulés. Donc ça, c'est plus une contribution. Il est important que les ministères de la Santé de vos pays travaillent sur le renforcement des performances des agences du médicament performance dans toutes les régulations, dans toutes les fonctions réglementaires, comme l'entend l'OMS. La deuxième contribution, c'est sur la gestion des données sanitaires. Je crois qu'un des intervenants précédents est intervenu sur ce point-là. Il est crucial de réfléchir à protéger ces données. Au niveau de l'Union européenne, c'est une action au niveau central qui a développé des règlements sur la protection des données sanitaires. Et je pense que là aussi, il faut travailler au niveau de l'Union africaine pour essayer d'harmoniser ces règlements sur la gestion et la protection des données sanitaires. Donc là, la question, c'est qu'en est-il du Sénégal? On l'a vu et le président de la République l'a rappelé ce matin avec le gros chantier autour du vaccinopole porté par l'Institut Pasteur de Dakar, donc un des 6 pôles d'excellence pour la fabrication des vaccins sur le continent africain. Probablement, le Sénégal sera aussi un des pôles d'excellence pour la production des médicaments essentiels pour les couvertures sanitaires universelles, en tout cas, on l'espère. Voilà, il y a tout un chantier. Et que pense faire le Sénégal pour porter ce leadership au niveau de l'Union africaine, au niveau des initiatives autour de l'AMA, l'Agence africaine du médicament, qui est en train de se mettre en place. Merci.
Voilà, merci beaucoup pour ce commentaire. Maintenant, nous allons passer la parole à tour de rôle aux orateurs, donc qui auront 2 minutes au maximum pour faire la synthèse. Donc, s'il y a d'autres questions sur lesquelles vous voulez également qu'on revienne, on pourra y revenir. Nous passons la parole à Franck d'abord.
La plupart des questions étaient orientées pour le ministre de la Santé. Donc, il va se faire une joie d'y répondre. Moi, j'aimerais juste rebondir sur l'aspect sécurité des données. Et lorsque je faisais mon propos tantôt, j'avais 2 valeurs cardinales nécessaires à faire passer les solutions de santé numérique à l'échelle. La première, c'était la transparence. Est-ce qu'on connaît les services médicaux qui sont prodigués aux patients? Est-ce qu'on connaît le niveau de qualité de soins donné à ce patient? Est-ce qu'on arrive à ne pas effacer les données si on a perdu, par exemple, un carnet médical? Est-ce qu'on arrive à sécuriser les données de telle manière que une structure médicale puisse travailler sur les données sans les voir? Il y a tous ces paramètres que on a maintenant de nouvelles technologies qui nous permettent de vraiment résoudre ces problèmes. Et c'est une des technologies qu'on utilise notamment au niveau de Kimbo Care. Nous sommes allés dans différents pays faire des phases pilotes, comprendre comment au niveau de ces pays il y avait la sécurisation des données. Et donc on a remonté avec une solution qui est maintenant propriétaire, qui permet de sécuriser les données, qui permet de les anonymiser et qui permet justement aux structures médicales, aux États de pouvoir travailler sur ces données sans jamais permettre aux hackers de les avoir. Donc, ce sont des technologies qui sont en pleine émergence, qui peuvent faire partie du panel des différents ministères de la Santé pour permettre justement aux données de leurs citoyens d'être préservées. Donc, je passe la parole à Dr. Stella.
Okay, merci Frank. Stella.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the questions. Very, very amazing nudges and provocations. Let me start from the pharmaceuticals, right? I'm a certified drug dealer. I call myself that. I'm a pharmacist like the gentleman here. How do we access medicines? The truth of the matter is, if we're going to start care from a digital perspective, we have to think about care end to end. So the user journeys of digital, very correct, cannot end at the teleconsultation bit. Yes. Are we making sure that the doctor has linked up with the patient? Absolutely. What happens in a consultation, and something as we are building these digital solutions, they have to be very patient-centric, human-centric, and make sure that we are taking into consideration the user journey from end to end, and then making sure we are digitizing that process. So after you've gotten your virtual consultation, either through text or voice, the next step is the doctor writes a prescription. Yes. From the doctor's interface, and what we've been able to create is that you can have an e-prescription sent to you on the same platform that you are able to access care from. So in the same mobile app that you are doing the teleconsultation, you'll receive an e-prescription. Now that e-prescription gives you the choice whether you want to be able to push it to the ecosystem of pharmacies, or you want to go to actually be able to get the care. One of the things that we are building is a chain of pharmacies around the same ecosystem to create a platform whereby it will be like an e-commerce platform. You say you want to send it to Good Life Pharmacy, you want to send it to Vine Pharmacy, you want to send it to whichever pharmacy, it will go to Vine Pharmacy, and then they will deliver to you at your doorstep. So that is how we can be able to make sure that everything is digitized. Now, one of the things that we have been facing as a challenge in that particular regard is how do we ensure that we create equity in that particular space? Because affordability of medication still is a conversation that we need to have, and it needs a very deep discussion around how can we be able to make sure that accessibility and affordability of these medicines actually happens. What usually happens, if you think about accessing medicine, you'll go to one pharmacy and they will quote for you a particular price. And then you go to another one and compare the prices. So how are you going to do that on a digital platform? The e-commerce platform enables you to do that. But unfortunately, the pharmacies do not want to do that because of competition. They are exposing their prices on there. So we have to think about a creative format whereby they are still viable in terms from a business perspective, but also most importantly, we are creating a place whereby this patient does not get exploited within the system. So yes, it's possible, to answer your question, to get your prescription filled. The doctor will send the e-prescription. You can be able to forward it to the pharmacy, or the doctor can be able to forward it to the pharmacy on your behalf, or you can be able to take that prescription and go and access care in a brick and mortar pharmacy. So I wanted to just clear that. I hope I have answered your question. In addition to what Frank mentioned about data privacy and protection, very true. Everyone wants data. Everyone is coming for data, but we have to protect the patient. Now, the colleague from Roche asked about how Senegal is doing it. I'm going to leave the Ministry of Health to answer that, but I'm going to tell you what we've been able to make sure we do on our platform. Globally, we have to adhere to the GDPR regulations. That is on a huge scale. But then from a national perspective, all digital, all ministries of innovation right now have policies of data privacy and protection laws that now are implemented, at least in East and Central Africa. And every digital health startup must prove that they are compliant with the global, the regional, and the national laws. For example, in both Kenya and Uganda, where I work, we've been able to comply and get certificates, making sure that the platform is tight, making sure that the data of this patient is protected. So the question is, what if the stakeholder, who happens to be perhaps we work a lot with corporates, want this data? What if, as a ministry, you want this data that is going to help you to make decisions? What if a third party wants data? This data now can be we can be able to process this data because we get certificates from a data controller, data processor perspective, and we can be able to relay this data not in an individualized format, but we relay it in an aggregated, anonymized format. So we protect the identity of the individual, but we can be able to mine insights and give you as a third party through a data analytics dashboard, through data that does not reveal the identity of the users behind the scenes. So from a regulatory perspective, all platforms have to be compliant with the data privacy and protection laws. at a global level GDPR, but also at a national level with the different and relevant ministries. I also want to touch on what Dr. Martin mentioned about the role of digital health in the future. I think it's going to be very exciting because digital is what, for example, if I'm going to mimic a different industry that has happened in the recent future, you've heard about the M-Pesa story in Kenya. You've heard about mobile transactions in Africa. Think about the fact that your phone becomes the biggest source of doing everything. That is where I see the role of digital health. If today you can enter a supermarket and not be able to remove your card and you can have transactions on your phone, that is how health is going to be. Why? Because of the demographic factor that we've just mentioned. We have more younger people who don't want to go to any place. They want all the services in one-stop shop. We have to make sure that we have an ecosystem approach to healthcare. So the role of digital is really being able to bring all these players together. The patient at the center, the provider, the payer, and every aggregated service all together to ensure that we are getting better health outcomes. The other thing I see as a role of digital health in the next few years in our country is what the gentleman was able to talk about, proactive care, because the kind of diseases we are looking at right now are really thinking about how can we incentivize you to actually stay healthy, because some of these diseases are preventable. You can prevent diabetes, you can prevent hypertension. So the role of digital care is actually being able to take down that prevalence of different disease burdens, especially when it comes to non-communicable diseases. How are we going to do that? Empower the patient to make better decisions. So I believe we can be able to mitigate both mortality and morbidity in that particular space when you think about the role of digital health in the next future. The other last role, I think, is being able to harness the synergies that we have across different sectors, but also most importantly, make sure that we are removing this fragmentation of healthcare. And what I talked about is you'll have the insurance as a payers doing their own thing for the patient. You have the hospitals doing different things for the patient. You have the patient making different decisions for themselves. You have everybody else working in silos. The role of digital is making sure that everybody is actually playing for one goal and a well-oiled machine. So we're going to remove the fragmentation of healthcare. And how can we be able to do that? Making sure that this data is actually seamless across the board. Today, if I go to another hospital in my country, I have to start a new file. And yet I have been going to hospital for the last how many years of my life. So what I'm going to do is to make sure insurance has my data, the providers have my data. And if an emergency happens, we don't have to start from scratch. Many people die because at the end of the day, nobody has your data. They have to run the tests that take a lot of time to start the process from scratch. Whilst if we had actually a seamless integration of data, will prevent some of these deaths that are actually preventable. I want to answer the last question Dr. Martin touched on in terms of the cross borders. The truth of the matter is that digital is breaking down the borders. So what are we going to do? We have to make sure that we empower the healthcare providers to actually do better. I am a pharmacist by training, but today I do strategy and innovations in the healthcare ecosystem. What am I saying? HR for health has to change. The human resource for healthcare has to also incorporate technology. Today, you'll go to all hospitals and they are working to become paperless. That means doctors don't write anymore with the bad handwriting. Sorry to all the doctors. Everything is digitized. They have to actually learn how to use a computer. You go to the triage center, you see the nurses struggling to actually be able to enter that data. What am I saying? That means from the ground up, we can no longer train people only from a medical perspective. We also have to make sure that they are digitally enabled, they are technologically enabled to be able to fight for the future problems. through technology. So I see that seamless, that breaking down of borders from a perspective of HR for health. And this healthcare provider is going to be a different person who's technologically enabled. I see a seamless flow of data. For example, if you want care today, we're in Senegal, I can be able to walk into hospital and make sure that they can actually take care of me without starting from scratch. So the future is bright for digital health, and I welcome you to participate in your different capacities. Thank you.
Ok, merci Stella. Je pense qu'elle a quand même fait le tour de l'ensemble des questions, mais pour le cas spécifique du Sénégal, donc nous allons donner la parole rapidement à Dr Dia qui va revenir sur la situation de la santé numérique au Sénégal, mais également la réglementation qui l'entoure et peut-être sur l'aspect relatif à la sécurisation également des données numériques. Dr Dia.
Merci beaucoup. Merci pour l'intérêt. Sur la vente de médicaments en ligne, c'est comme ça que je peux l'appeler en résumé. On a fait un colloque avec les pharmaciens. Et aujourd'hui, je leur disais qu'il n'y a aucun texte qui interdit à un pharmacien de livrer à domicile. On a vu ce qui s'est passé avec les taxis. Les taxis africains ont refusé la technologie et après ils ont subi la technologie. Donc on ne sait jamais, tout peut arriver. Le numérique n'a pas de frontières et le numérique brise les frontières. Donc il faut se préparer à tout. Réglementation, nous au Sénégal, on a déjà élaboré notre projet de loi et de décret sur la santé numérique. On a abordé toutes ces questions de données, à qui ça appartient, qui a le droit d'héberger des données, c'est quoi qui peut également la durée de conservation de la donnée, si la personne décède, combien de temps on peut garder l'information. On a abordé la question de la télémédecine, comment on fait la télémédecine, qui fait la télémédecine. On a abordé la question de l'interopérabilité. Donc, toutes ces questions-là ont été abordées dans le projet de décret. On l'avait envoyé à l'institution qui gère ça au niveau national pour la validation juridique. On a reçu des commentaires des ministères. Actuellement, nous devons juste consulter l'ordre des médecins sur certaines questions précises. Parce qu'il y a des données médicales, nous voulons que le patient y accède. Et il y a quand même peut-être des contraintes sur la loi de 66 qui peut-être demandent que toutes les données ne soient pas accessibles aux patients. Donc, on va gérer ça avec l'ordre des médecins avant de pouvoir continuer le processus. La sécurisation, au Sénégal, nous avons décidé d'héberger les données dans une institution publique qui a été créée par l'État, qui est la CENOM. Donc, c'est une société qui est dans l'informatique, qui appartient à l'État. Mais également, on est ouvert aussi s'il y a des hébergements cloud sécurisés. Il n'y a pas de sécurité 100%, mais il y a beaucoup de techniques pour pouvoir sécuriser, mais il n'y a pas 100%. Il peut toujours arriver des problèmes. C'est pourquoi la grosse question, c'est est-ce que nous hébergeons toutes les données et que les hôpitaux, chaque matin, s'y connectent, ou est-ce qu'on laisse les hôpitaux héberger également? Donc, c'est une grosse question, parce que les hôpitaux, si les hôpitaux hébergent, est-ce qu'ils ont la technicité pour pouvoir assurer la sécurité des serveurs qui sont dans les hôpitaux? Ou est-ce qu'on fait une base de données nationale où chaque matin, il faut l'Internet pour se connecter et pouvoir... Ce sont des discussions importantes sur lesquelles nous sommes en train de réfléchir. Le futur, l'avenir de la santé digitale, moi, je pense simplement que aujourd'hui, tous les pays africains sont dans la santé digitale. Tous les pays. L'Afrique du Sud, l'Égypte, Cap-Vert, Mozambique, tout le monde est dedans. Mais moi, je pense que d'ici 5 ans, il y aura peu qui pourront dire que le patient peut tourner avec son dossier médical. Le patient peut aller au poste de santé, à l'hôpital, à la clinique et trouver ses données. Il y aura peu de pays qui pourront réussir ça. Il y aura pas aussi qui pourront dire que voilà, la télémédecine est maintenant un paquet de services intégrés dans le système de santé. Je pense que d'ici 5 ans, ça va être peu de pays, mais je pense que si on avance, d'ici 10 ans, moi je pense que je suis convaincu que les pays africains pourront arriver parce que c'est une tendance forte. On ne peut pas arrêter cette tendance-là et je pense que forcément il faut que tout le monde bouge pour y aller. Et il y a beaucoup de partenaires pour nous accompagner. Le rôle des donateurs, en parlant de partenaires, c'est un grand problème parce que la santé digitale, il y a beaucoup d'enjeux financiers derrière. Moi, je peux être un simple partenaire et brusquement voir un enjeu derrière. Parce que j'ai une société, j'ai un ami qui a une société informatique. Voilà, on sait que la société informatique, ça peut être de l'argent continu pour moi. Peut-être 1%, 2%. Ce qui fait que maintenant, c'est difficile. Tout le monde a un intérêt dedans. Mais ce que nous disons, pour nous, le partenaire doit rester partenaire comme il faisait quand il donnait des médicaments. Il donne des médicaments et il n'y a aucun intérêt derrière. Quand je dis aucun intérêt, c'est entre guillemets, mais je veux dire pas un intérêt mercantile ou chercher des bénéfices. Donc nous sommes dans cette logique-là. Sinon aussi, il faut laisser les pays travailler avec les institutions onusiennes parce que nous sommes sur un terrain sensible. C'est le terrain des données médicales, c'est le terrain de la télémédecine. Les urgences sanitaires, les frontières, je pense quand même qu'il y a des initiatives. Africa CDC a une stratégie santé digitale. Moi, je suis au courant de ça parce que nous l'avons élaboré. Nous savons aussi que l'Organisation ouest-africaine de la santé, si vous voulez, c'est l'OMS Afrique de l'Ouest, également a proposé un logiciel pour tout ce qui est surveillance, tout ce qui est frontières. Donc, nous espérons aussi que cette question sera abordée. Je ne termine pas, je ne vais pas parler des médicaments malheureusement, mais je sais qu'il y a une agence qui travaille dur sur ça et nous sommes confiants que l'agence pourra quand même atteindre les résultats. Mais je termine sur la protection des données globalement, que dans le continent africain, on va commencer peut-être à faire comme l'Asie. L'Asie, c'est une réflexion globale des pays, donc ce qui fait qu'on économise. Les questions sont gérées au niveau macro, pas au niveau micro. J'espère quand même que cette tendance-là que l'OMS a, cette tendance que l'Union africaine a, pourra se poursuivre pour qu'on ait une réflexion globale, parce qu'il n'y a pas de frontières pour le numérique. Merci.
Voilà, mesdames et messieurs, donc nous avons quand même eu un panel très riche sur un thème d'actualité qui est l'avenir surtout de la santé numérique. Et à l'occasion également de ce panel, Dr Stella et Franck nous ont quand même gratifié deux belles présentations, donc, dont l'une sur une nouvelle technologie qui vise à améliorer surtout la transparence et la livraison de soins en Afrique par Dr Franck, et l'autre un partage d'expérience en ce qui concerne l'utilisation du numérique dans la sensibilisation en matière de soins et surtout pour les maladies non transmissibles. Mais les débats quand même ont été très riches et je pense que nous avons eu à partager l'expérience du Sénégal en matière de la santé numérique avec l'apport de Dr Dia. Mais surtout pour terminer, moi je lancerai donc les réflexions sur deux points essentiellement en matière de santé numérique. L'une, c'est surtout l'harmonisation dans la réglementation en matière donc, de la santé numérique. Mais l'autre également, c'est de réfléchir sur la sécurisation des données que cette santé numérique également va concrétiser. Donc, je termine par féliciter l'ensemble des orateurs, mais également remercier tous les participants ici présents et l'ensemble également des orateurs au nom du ministère de la Santé et de l'Action sociale. Donc, merci à tous et excellente suite de session.
Thank you.